The rain started falling the moment the termination letter was folded and shoved into a coat pocket, as if the sky itself had decided to underline the humiliation. Fired. Just like that. One clipped meeting, averted eyes, corporate phrases about budget cuts, and years of quiet sacrifice were reduced to a cardboard box and a walk home. The nurse walked down the cracked sidewalk with soaked shoes and a heavier heart than she had ever known, unaware that within the hour, 2 helicopters would rip the sky open, screaming one impossible question that would change everything: where's the nurse? If you believe in kindness, in second chances, in the idea that the world sometimes bends toward justice when we least expect it, take a moment right now to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this remind us why humanity still matters. Her name was Mara, and until that morning she had been a nurse at the city hospital for 12 years. Not the kind who made speeches or won awards, but the kind who stayed late to sit with dying patients so they wouldn't be alone, who remembered allergies without checking charts, who learned the names of janitors and cafeteria workers and treated them like family. She had raised her younger brother after their parents died, worked night shifts through exhaustion, and built her entire identity around being useful, dependable, invisible. And now she was none of those things. Just a woman walking home in the rain, replaying the moment the administrator slid the paper across the desk and said nothing more than necessary. The firing itself had been especially cruel because it came after an argument she hadn't even wanted to have. Earlier that week, a powerful donor's son had been admitted after a reckless accident, and the pressure from above had been clear: prioritize him, even if it meant delaying care for others. Mara had refused quietly but firmly, insisting on treating patients by severity, not status. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't broken protocol. She had simply done her job. That was apparently enough to mark her as a problem. As she walked, the city blurred around her, neon lights smeared by rain and tears she refused to let fall. She told herself she would figure it out, that she always did, but the truth was clawing at her chest. Without this job, she didn't know who she was. Her phone buzzed twice in her pocket, messages from her brother asking how work went, from a landlord reminding her about rent. She didn't answer. She kept walking, head down, past the park where she sometimes ate lunch, past the bus stop she couldn't afford anymore. That was when the sound began, distant at first, like thunder that didn't belong to the clouds. A low, growing roar that made people stop and look up. Mara did too, instinctively shielding her eyes as the rain whipped sideways. 2 military-grade helicopters descended toward the open field near the river, wind tearing at trees, trash lifting into the air. People screamed and scattered. Sirens joined the chaos. And then, over loudspeakers, a voice cut through the storm, sharp with urgency, repeating the same words again and again. They were asking for a nurse. At first, Mara thought it was some terrible coincidence, a disaster unfolding somewhere else, nothing to do with her. She stepped back, heart pounding, watching paramedics and security flood the area. The helicopters landed hard, grass flattening beneath them, rotors screaming. The voice repeated the question, now more frantic, specifying details that made her breath catch. They needed a nurse with trauma experience, someone who had worked critical care, someone who knew pediatric protocols and emergency improvisation. Each word felt like a hand closing around her past. This was her, every line of it, but she hesitated, frozen by the absurdity. She had been fired less than an hour ago. She wasn't even employed anymore. Who was she to step forward? Around her, people shouted useless suggestions, pointed, filmed with their phones. No one moved with purpose. Mara's mind raced. Years of training, of instinct, of muscle memory screamed at her to act. Another part of her whispered that it wasn't her responsibility anymore, that she had been discarded, that she owed the system nothing. But then she heard it, barely audible beneath the machinery, the cry of a child. Raw, terrified, slipping into silence. Something inside her broke open. Titles didn't matter. Paychecks didn't matter. A life did. She ran. Rain-soaked and breathless, she pushed through the crowd, waving her hands, shouting that she was a nurse, that she could help. At first, no one listened. Then a medic grabbed her arm, eyes searching her face with desperation rather than doubt. She was pulled forward, briefed in fragments as they ran. A high-profile humanitarian's granddaughter had collapsed mid-event across the river, a sudden reaction, multiple organ distress. Roads were gridlocked. Time was bleeding out. They needed someone on the ground immediately to stabilize her before transport. Mara didn't ask questions. She didn't think about the termination letter crumpling in her pocket. She climbed into the helicopter as if she had never done anything else. Inside, the world narrowed to sound and motion and purpose. The child was small, skin pale against the red of emergency lights, chest struggling. Mara moved without hesitation, hands steady despite the turbulence. She remembered every drill, every night shift where she'd whispered encouragement to herself just to keep going. She improvised when equipment lagged, adapted when readings spiked, communicated calmly over the roar. Fear was there, yes, but it was buried beneath something stronger, clarity. This was where she belonged. This was who she was, whether anyone paid her or not. By the time they landed at the private emergency facility, the child was breathing more evenly. Not safe yet, but alive. Doctors swarmed, questions flying, eyes widening as they absorbed the rapid-fire summary Mara delivered. She stayed until she was no longer needed, until her hands finally began to shake with the release of adrenaline. Only then did she step back, suddenly aware of how wet and tired she was, how surreal the last hour had been. She expected to be dismissed quietly, thanked and forgotten. Instead, the room went still. The child's grandfather arrived moments later, a man whose name opened doors and silenced rooms, his face carved with fear rather than power. He listened as doctors explained what had happened and who had been instrumental in saving his granddaughter's life. When his eyes found Mara, they filled with something dangerously close to tears. She tried to step away, uncomfortable, but he stopped her with a gesture. He asked her name, her role, her hospital. And when she told him, when she mentioned she had been fired that morning for refusing to bend rules, the air shifted. What followed wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet and absolute. Phone calls were made. Records were reviewed. Administrators were summoned. The truth, once exposed, spread quickly. By the end of the night, the story had already begun to circulate, not as gossip but as reckoning. A nurse fired for integrity. A life saved because of it. The hospital scrambled, issuing statements, reversing decisions, offering apologies that rang hollow. But something else happened too. Offers came in from places Mara had never imagined, from organizations that valued ethics over optics, from teams that understood what she had done not as insubordination, but as courage. Yet the most important moment came later, when she finally went home, changed into dry clothes, and sat alone on her bed, the city quiet outside her window. The weight of the day settled over her, and she cried, not from sadness this time, but from release. She thought about how close she had come to believing she was disposable, how easily the world had tried to convince her that her worth was conditional. She thought about the child, alive because someone had stood their ground earlier that week. She realized that even when systems fail, individual choices still matter. Days later, she returned to the park she had walked through after being fired. The grass still bore faint marks where the helicopters had landed. People passed by without knowing, without caring. But Mara stood there, breathing deeply, feeling something new take root inside her. Not bitterness. Not triumph. Purpose, reclaimed on her own terms. She accepted a position with an emergency response unit that operated beyond politics and donors, one that went where help was needed most. She didn't do it for revenge or recognition. She did it because she had been reminded, in the most unlikely way, that doing the right thing could still ripple outward, even when it cost everything at first. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of the quiet heroes who walk among us carrying unseen burdens, please take a moment now to like the video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel so more stories like this can be told. And before this story ends, I have one special request for you. Comment below and tell us whether you believe integrity is still worth the risk in today's world. Because somewhere, right now, someone is walking home in the rain, believing they've lost everything, unaware that the very thing they were punished for may soon become the reason the world calls their name.